Welcome to the show. This is the first video podcast with Megan here. I'm excited. Let's kind of get into it. So, do you mind introducing yourself and tell me a little about yourself?
Yeah. My name is Megan Wynn. I am a first year at Texas Tech. Oh, it's such a long name. Texas Tech School of Medicine. Um, I just graduated college this past year, 2023, from UT. I'm originally from Houston. Some things I like to do in my free time are running, working out, or hiking. Anything outdoors is really fun for me. And I really enjoy what is it? Oh, portrait photography. I've blanked for a little bit, but I do a lot of portrait photography, and I sing a little bit. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Gotcha. That's way more things than I do, definitely for sure. So it's nice meeting you here, and I'm happy that you volunteered your time to do this podcast, which is the first one. So, kind of what I'm going to do is we'll just have some good conversations and just kind of take it from there. So, how did you meet me, and kind of what convinced you to kind of do this podcast?
Okay. So Daniel reached out to me. It was actually funny because I had gotten Daniel's number from a classmate, and it was like the first semester. I don't know, September or something. And I wanted to shadow some ENTs because I was kind of getting into the field, and my friend gave me his number, and I texted and I was like, hey, is it cool if I shadow? And then he actually never got back to me, and I just forgot about it. And then he reached out to me again recently in January, and he was asking me if I could help him out with promoting his new business, MD Boost. And I mean, obviously, I'll help anybody out. I'm not going to say no to anyone in anyone's face. So I was like, yeah, sure. And then of course, he answered my previous question saying I can shadow whenever. So yeah, it kind of just spiraled from there. And I agreed to do this kind of video podcasting because I mean, it's pretty easy to talk about yourself, yeah,
Sure,
but
sure.
I think also there is that thing of a lot of stuff on the internet saying that, or there's a lot of stuff on the internet where medical students or even residents, they kind of just show the pretty parts of medicine.
Yeah.
And I mean, I might be guilty of that sometimes because it's not really, I'm not going to post myself crying. I've seen videos of people crying and I kind of cringe a little bit. Like, I don't think I would ever do that, but I
Sure,
think I would be real about like I struggled with XYZ, and I
sure,
think that's what needs to be talked about. You know,
sure.
I won't go the other direction.
For,
Cry.
for, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, so that's a funny way, kind of how me and Megan met here. I mean, yeah, like she said, she texted me originally, kind of to ask to shadow when she started her first year in medical school. Me being the resident I am, I'm a fifth year PGY5 chief resident for an ENT in Lubbock, Texas, kind of Texas Tech University Health Science Center, where Megan's doing her medical school, and also where I did my medical school. But just being the resident that I am, I kind of lost track of who texted me, and it's kind of one of those things where when you're super busy, next thing you know, like that text has gone down, couple months, right? In this instance, it was many months, right? And then so I kind of was figuring out, hey, like I'm starting this new business, so I'm trying to reach out to people in the medical school, and I actually got Megan's number from somebody else, and when I was typing in her number, her old text message popped up, and I'm like, oh crap, I messed up. So funny way that we met, of course, but definitely glad that we were able to finally connect. She shouted me a couple times, and yeah, I just want to hear her, real perspective on medicine, and not just the fun parts, the happy parts, but also the stressful parts of medicine, and the stressors, of course. I guess the next question I have for you is kind of, do you regret meeting me? Right, I know it's only been a couple times, but are you regretting this already?
No, no. Why? That was that like a list of your questions that you're gonna ask everybody?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's kind of, one of the questions that I want to ask everyone is, definitely for sure,
Yeah.
I'm kind of an extrovert, so sometimes I can be semi annoying for sure, but hopefully you don't regret meeting me.
No, no. Regret isn't. No, I think if anyone was to regret it, I don't think regret's the word.
Yeah,
But I'm also an extrovert, so like, I mean, I think in some situations, especially with interacting with residents when I'm a medical student, and
yeah,
then this was me as a pre-med interacting with medical students. I think I naturally just kind of shy away. But a
Sure.
lot of my close friends are like, no, Megan talks a little too much. So whenever I can see someone else who's very extroverted, I'm like, no, I completely understand. You're not annoying me at all.
Sure, sure. And just to make sure the audience kind of knows that me and Megan, even though we have the same last name, no relation whatsoever. There's a lot of wins out there. It's like the Smith of Vietnamese people, so we have no relationship whatsoever. So talking about kind of as a medical student, you know, talking to residents, talking to attendings, kind of what is your initial kind of feeling when you've had those conversations? Is it a little bit more intimidating, or kind of what do you feel?
I think usually it's intimidating, especially whenever I shadow. Generally, I feel very awkward whenever I shadow
Sure.
because I recognize stuff. I've learned some of this stuff, but I also haven't seen it in person, or at least I haven't seen it since like October at
Sure.
the most recent, because that was whenever we finished up anatomy. So um, it usually feels a little intimidating. And then depending on how the attending or the resident is, whenever I meet them, I feel a little more easygoing.
Sure.
But I
Sure.
think in general, the learning environment as a medical student, you do feel kind of like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, and then the hospital employees around you, they all know each other too, and you're kind of just like standing there.
Yeah.
So it can be a little intimidating.
For sure, for sure. I think I had a very similar experience. I know I'm very far removed, but I still remember kind of my first time interacting with residents and attendings. And, you are very kind of, in a sense, you know, very kind of shy, like you said, is a good word, right? Of course, a little bit intimidated, but at the same time, right? At least for me, not sure your experience, but when I was a first year, second year student talking to a resident attending, you're a little bit starstruck too, because you think that that's kind of what you're leading to and what you want to become. I'm not sure if you've had that kind of same kind of
Yeah, I
interaction
mean,
too.
even with you, yeah, like, because I'm over here at the very beginning of my training. I'm like first year
Sure,
medical school, and then you're in your last year of residency. So there is a little bit of that starstruck feeling that you're describing, like, oh my gosh,
sure.
like that's gonna be me in 8 years. I think it's
Sure,
8
sure.
years.
No, for sure, for sure. For sure. And I think one of the things that make it intimidating is like because of this kind of, I would say love hate feeling, right? Where you're like intimidated, right? But also starstruck. But like, yeah, I think that adds kind of quite a bit of pressure. I'm not sure if you feel that kind of same way when you're around attendings or residents that you kind of want to perform at, a higher level, right?
Yeah, it doesn't usually happen, but
Yeah. Hey, trust me, it took me a long, long time. And even then, sometimes with the guys that are at top of the ENT field, you feel like you're still always a couple steps behind. So I think that feeling never goes away completely, right? Medicine
yeah.
is a learning kind of field forever, right? You never
Mhm.
completely done
Mhm.
learning. So for
Yeah.
sure. So kind of from your limited time, right? You just started from medical school. What are your three favorite things that you like about medical school?
Okay. Oh, this is gonna. I feel like I'm interviewing for medical school again. I have to think about it. So,
No, like kind of your favorite things
I'll
from your
say,
experience, I guess.
okay. I think the first thing that kind of comes to mind is the since lectures aren't mandatory, which is, I mean, a few of my classes in undergrad were completely virtual because COVID happened in my freshman year of college. So the rest of my college experience was, virtual option, or you could go in person, or it's just usually not mandatory. So whenever I was about to start medical school, I was like, oh my gosh, um, they're going to have mandatory attendance. And I think some schools still do, but at Tech specifically, we don't have mandatory attendance for lectures. And so that's one of my favorite things because it takes a lot of pressure off of like waking up extra early to work out, or having to sit down from 8 to 12 for 5 days a week, which one of my friends does that, which is crazy because I mean,
Sure,
like we learn about the DVTs, and like now I can't stop thinking about like what if that just happens to me from 4 hours of lecture.
sure,
So
sure.
that's one thing that I really like about it. Um, Another thing that I liked about medical school so far is I think it's actually kind of like a love-hate relationship about the location.
Sure.
So Lubbock is kind of just, it's like in the middle of nowhere, West Texas, right? But
Yeah.
it kind of gave me the opportunity to still keep seeing my friends in Dallas or Austin because I'm from Houston. So,
Sure.
and I don't like to buy airplane tickets. And so
So
what I'll do
can you let
is,
the audience know kind of can you let the audience know how far is Lubbock from kind of everything, right? So how far is it on a drive standpoint from Dallas, Austin, so that they know how isolated we are?
okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm originally from Houston, and I'm not from West Houston. I'm from Northeast Houston. So it's a little extra driving that we have to do. And whenever I drove here, just the whole way, whenever I was moving up to Lubbock, it was. I think the GPS says 8 hours, but whenever you account the times that you stop to use the restroom, and I mean, my baby sister was with me, so she's definitely going to be using the restroom. That was like 9 hours.
Yeah,
So I mean, I've never made the drive alone, but I'm terrified to ever do that. So, obviously, whenever I go home for breaks that are a little longer, I have the time to drive. We're not like, I don't have anything to really study for over breaks. So I'm like, let me split up the drive over 2 days, and I stop at Dallas or Austin. So
sure,
with Dallas, that's about, at least with like from my house to my aunt's house, who's in Fort Worth, it's about 4.5 hours, and then accounting for traffic, it's like 5 hours. So I just say 5 hours. And then the following day, it's 4 hours to Houston. And then with Austin, that one's longer. It's 6 hours to get
sure.
there, and then 3 hours to Houston. So total is 9 hours whenever you split it up like that. But um, I mean, the idea of driving for 9 hours straight is just so horrifying to me that 6 hours is nothing. And like, I've made the Austin drive a lot, and so whenever I drove to Dallas for the first time from here, I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's only 5 hours! It's
Sure.
so quick. It's the quickest
For
drive
sure.
ever."
Do you feel as though the
But yeah,
distance
so I think,
Yeah. Oh,
hmm?
sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. I was just gonna say, do you feel as though the distance between the big cities, kind of besides kind of the physical isolation, do you feel as though, that makes medical school a little bit more stressful that, a lot of your kind of support, your friends and family are so far?
Yeah, it definitely scared me at the, like, before starting medical school, because I was like, holy crap, everyone's far from me. Especially my very close friends. They're in Austin and Houston, and then I have a boyfriend. He's also in Houston, and so it sucks being far away from it. And like my family, duh. But that was that was a no brainer, so I didn't mention them. But so going into medical school, I was really worried about that because it's just far. I've never been the type to, I mean, in my relationship, I've never been the type to like be super clingy. And so I
Sure.
was like, oh, I mean, but then again, I was in Austin, he was in Houston. So I was like, 3 hours is nothing. So it didn't really feel like there was
Sure.
that much distance. But whenever you move so far away, I think it's like 500 miles from Houston.
Yeah, it's
Um,
very, very far.
it's just like, just wrapping your mind around that is really scary. And then coming out of college to that was really hard for me too, because my friends lived about like a 15-10 minute walk from me.
Yeah,
And if
yeah,
we carpooled for something, it was like a 10-minute drive. And, I lived downtown in Austin, so everything was just generally really close. And then moving here right after graduation, or very briefly after graduation, it was completely different. It's not as walkable. My friends aren't here.
yeah,
And I don't even live in Lubbock. I live in Wolfworth. So that's like
yeah,
that's like physically farther, even though I can cut the time to like 12 minutes to get to school.
sure.
But yeah, it's a lot more driving. So that was also something that I had to adjust to here, because I hate driving. I'd rather just walk wherever.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the nice things for sure, being kind of in the middle of nowhere, right, in Texas, right? And remember, Lubbock is still in Texas, and when we're talking about going to, Lubbock to Houston, right, or Lubbock to Dallas, you're talking hours, right? I think majority of the people when they talk
Mhm.
about traveling, you talk about in miles, but we don't talk about in miles because it's just so many miles, right? So for sure, it
Yeah.
makes medical school, a lot more difficult. But I guess another question for you is, being in a smaller city, right, to pursue your career in medicine,
Mhm.
how do you feel as though, when you see kind of your friends on social media, or you catch up with your friends that are from bigger cities that maybe not be in the medical field or in the medical field, do you feel like a sense of, FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, right? You're seeing your friends kind of do things in a big city while you're studying. Like, tell me kind of how you feel kind of
Yeah.
about that.
Okay, yeah. So I think I got really lucky with the fact that a lot of my friends from college were pre-med. So they're either in medical school or they're working or doing their gap years right now. And then my non-medical friends from college, they're engineering and business, like the very typical jobs. But I feel like they're not necessarily the type who are going on very lavish
Sure.
vacations. So I think that helps with the FOMO front. But I think what I get the most FOMO from is I have a friend doing medical school in New York, which is like a
Yeah.
completely different environment from here. So
Sure.
I'll get FOMO from that because I'm like her boyfriend can visit her and they can make a whole trip out of it because there's
Sure.
just so much to do. And she posts videos of her classmates and
Sure.
they seem really cool. And then I have a friend in LA too, which is also another really big city. And I'm like, you can just go to the beach whenever you're having
Sure.
a bad day or something.
Sure.
Um, and with road tripping, it's probably just a couple of hours to another city, whereas here it's like the closest city is about 4 or 5 hours away.
Sure.
And so definitely a lot of FOMO in the sense of like my actual environment for medical school, not
Sure.
necessarily traveling. Because for me, I kind of try to have the mindset of like, I like to spend my money on experiences. And so
Yeah.
moving to Lubbock, there's not as much things to do
Sure.
here. And so, I'm not always trying to go out to eat or
Sure.
doing fun things in this city because I'm like, I think I can save this money for something bigger or something
For
better.
sure.
And I feel like I always kind of try to make time for that too. I'm a very big proponent of um, work-life balance and not
Sure.
pausing life because of medical school, even whenever it feels like I have to pause everything, I try not to.
Sure, for sure. I think making an effort, right? Of course, making an effort to make time for other things in medicine is super, super important, and we don't talk too much about it. I think just because I think out there, what's out there on social media is that, oh yeah, we can balance everything all the time, right, and not sacrifice. But I don't think that that's per se, completely accurate of what goes on when we deal with the medical
Yeah.
career. So talk to me about kind of, how often are you able to, let's say you have a test upcoming in that week on Friday, right? What does your
Yeah.
week look like starting from Monday? Do you feel as though, how many hours are you studying? How much sleep are you getting? Are you having time to kind of see friends, family, talk to them? Tell me, kind of work me through that.
Okay. Yeah. So at Texas Tech, what the faculty does is they release an exam the Friday before the actual exam, practice exam, before the actual exam. So you have 7 days to take it, review it, do whatever you want with it, and then prepare for the upcoming exam. So what I usually do is, and I mean, I just want to preface it like I think every answer is just going to vary depending on the medical student you talk to.
Sure.
But what I do is I try to take the practice exam on the weekend or Monday at the latest.
Sure.
And from there, I write down all of the topics that I missed on the exam, just like broadly. And then, because, I don't want to review it based on the actual exam
Sure.
because then it's
So
going
let
to
me
skew
let
my
me kind of chime in a little bit here. So you talk about kind of your practice test that you have to take, right? And just so everyone knows, when you take this practice test, the initial practice test for this test, right? How many questions is it? On average, kind of what percentage are you getting right on these?
Oh my God, no, I'm like failing those. But yeah, there's like about so we have in-house exams and then sometimes we have an NBME at the end of
Sure.
a few years. Like our final is usually the NBME. So I'll use the upcoming exam as an example. So we are doing it's going to be an NBME exam, which is like the standardized exam with the format of step one, and it's going to be over the immunology, hematology, and oncology systems. But 3 weeks prior to today, we had our immunology exam, and that was an in-house exam. So the exam that I'm preparing for is 90 questions, I think. So
Gotcha.
I think the practice exam is gonna be 90 questions, but
Sure.
the in-house exams are like 60 or 65 questions.
So talk to
And
me the
so
difference about your in-house versus kind of this NBME. You say that, obviously I kind of know exactly what you're talking about for people kind of either peering in from a pre-med standpoint or even people that are not in medicine, right? And so you said the NBME is kind of based on our standardized test that we have to take at the end of second year and in the third year, which is step one and step two. But what is an in-house test, and why is that different from a standardized test?
So in-house exams are so whenever you're in medical school, right, you have lectures every day. And that's, what the professors at the school want to teach you. And they usually align with the concepts that you learn for step one and step two, like the standardized exams. But the questions for in-house exams are written by the professors at my school. And so those questions are obviously not like throwaway questions. They're
Sure.
perfectly fine and they test you over the lecture material. Um, but then NBME questions are specifically formatted for the standardized exam. And
Okay.
so there's actually a lot of controversy on the internet among medical students where they're
Yeah.
like, oh, I wish I went to an NBME school.
Yeah, so talk to me. The reason why I want to kind of talk a little bit about this is because, can you let kind of, talk to me about, so you talk about like your professors that are creating these in-house tests, right? Are they MDs or are they PhDs, or what degree do they have?
Oh gosh, I wish I I wish I knew because I think they're PhDs.
Yes.
I know during anatomy, because that's like the last time I sat in during lectures. One of them was a PT or a physical therapist, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think majority of them are PhDs.
Yeah.
Maybe MD, but they sometimes bring MDs in for guest lectures, but
Gotcha.
that's about the majority.
Yep. So one of the things, one of the controversies of, medical education that I believe, right, is that, all these in-house tests, right, are created by PhDs, that, they haven't taken step one or step two, right? They're not
Mhm.
clinically oriented. They're very scientifically oriented, right? And so what ends up happening in kind of my years of tutoring medical students is that I found out that these tests are very skewed towards in the direction of what they're researching, or something that won't see a textbook for another 5 to 10 years. Tell me kind of what your perspective. I mean, it's been a long time since I've taken an in-house test, thank God I no longer
Yeah.
have to do that. But tell me kind of, your in-house test, how do you feel as though that relates clinically? Is it now getting more clinically oriented, or do you still feel like it's very basic science heavy, their thesis, their research? Kind of tell me what you feel on that.
So I think it really depends on the unit that we're doing. So I'll use kind of one of our previous blocks as an example. So we had um, a block called General Principles, and at other schools it's called Foundations or whatever. But that's essentially like biochem and all those scientific prerequisites that you take in medical school. And it's split up into 3 units. So the first unit is biochem. The second unit was like, okay, that was actually the worst unit ever. I think it was like molecular bio and cell bio. And then the third one was microbio, which is bugs and drugs. And in terms of whether I feel like they're clinically relevant, so I don't know how they were back then, or maybe it was really scientific back then. But so our first unit was the biochem unit, and I thought it was like a solid exam. There was a good amount of clinical correlates, and then some factual stuff like I don't know if you don't have some of this substrate, then what do you not have enough of at the end or something?
Sure.
But then, and I felt like okay about the content there, and then we switched to mol bio slash cell bio, and all the questions were like fact based,
Yeah.
and it was kind of like you knew it or you didn't,
Sure.
and which sucks because you get so used to applying the material in a clinical setting, and you're like,
Sure.
okay, what's a disorder called whenever this certain thing is defective. But then you take an exam that's like I don't know. I can't even think of an example question because I forgot all of it. But
Sure, sure.
it was a lot of like, right or wrong, you know it or you don't,
Sure.
which, had me thinking that I was going to fail it because I didn't know a lot of this stuff.
For sure, for sure, and I think that's one of the things when you're talking such a heavy basic science with no application of a application to the standpoint of step one or step two, right? Any application of that, a lot of the times is kind of this issue of kind of studying pump and dump, right? Where you learn something,
Mhm.
right? And you're like, hey, I need to
Yeah.
remember this for the next 2 years for my standardized test. But
Yeah.
I think sometimes that happens kind of in medical school. And I don't think you're the only one that has that issue, right? Because if you were to ask me to recall something super basic science that, a PhD told me, I could not come up with
Yeah.
the information for
I
sure.
wouldn't, yeah, I mean, I took it more recently than you did, and I don't think I could tell you.
For sure, for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the difficult things about kind of medical education is that a lot of these classes, especially your first 2 years in medical school, are taught by PhDs, which I think there is a disconnect, right? Of course, between um, there's a disconnect between what's kind of going to be on step one, step two, what's clinical, right? And of course, the reason why is because I think there's just not a lot of MDs that are giving tons and tons of lecture on a daily basis, right? Like you said, they're mainly guest lectures, right? So
Yeah.
but yeah, so talking kind of a little bit more about the education that you've gotten in medical school, what are some things that you dislike? If you were to give me a couple, and what you feel as though could be improved?
In terms of the education.
Yeah, the education kind of, maybe whether I know this is a broad question, of course,
Mhm.
but it could be
Yeah.
dealing with resources. It can be dealing with how classes are taught. It could be,
Mhm.
how, the 4 years are structured. It can be a lot of things. And I know that, you're first year medical student. And so, the scope that your kind of broad knowledge of the medical education is still developing, but, this is a fresh kind of new set of ideas and eyes since you're a first year. So I'm curious of what you think.
Okay. So I think, okay, since you brought up like the structure of the 4 years, that kind of rung a bell in my head. So a lot of medical schools do a 2 year preclinical and then a 2 year clinical period. So
Sure.
you do all the classroom learning your first 2 years, and then you take your first board exam. And then when you pass it, you go to the hospital and start seeing real patients for the last 2 years of medical school, which isn't a bad structure. I think it's fine. But I think in recent years, there's kind of been a push towards 1 year preclinicals.
Uh huh.
So it's getting medical students in the hospital a lot sooner. And I used to think they were kind of crazy because I was like, how can you just cut that in half, the 2 years, and turn it into one? And then you kind of wonder when the board exams kind of come in because I know some schools they take the board exams after their rotations or something, which is crazy because that's taking an exam over the first year or something of medical school after your second year or something like that.
Sure.
But whenever I started getting involved in ENT and kind of exploring specialties, I started to learn about the world of research in medical school and how it's
Yeah.
really big now for residency applications. I don't know if it was big whenever you were applying, Daniel, but
Yeah. Yeah. It was super big. And it, research kind of, for our viewers to know is that you have to kind of publish, whether it's case reports, retrospective studies, prospective studies, but practically to show that you can contribute into the academic side of medicine while also balancing studying for school, right, volunteering, right, doing all the clubs and all this stuff, right. Is practically show that you can balance academically all sorts of things. So yeah, research is a huge thing, of course, and of course it adds more stress. I mean, I'm not sure. Most medical students tell me it adds more stress. I'm not sure how you feel about research.
Yeah, because I mean, then that it's kind of just like some schools don't have a lot of research, some do, and then it's kind of hard where you have to seek out those opportunities on your own. But so whenever I was kind of exploring other specialties and learning about the residency application process, which is like, oh my gosh, it's like 4 years from now. I don't know why I was doing all this before medical school started, but I did kind of start to see the logic behind a 1 year preclinical because it gets you into the hospital earlier, and that's whenever you can see firsthand whether you like a certain specialty.
Sure.
And for that reason, like once you figure out what you want to do, then you can devote your time to do research in there instead of like, I don't know, casting your net really wide and doing a bunch of random projects that
For sure.
aren't super meaningful to you. So some schools will have a built-in research year during the 3rd year, so they'll like do 1 year of preclinical and then go to the hospital for 2nd year, and then they just get a year off to
Sure.
do research,
Sure.
or dual degrees and stuff. And I feel like that really helps with residency applications. And I mean, I'm not a resident yet. I'm not going to be there anytime soon, but I feel like that would be super helpful for me. Um, just to have some assurance that, I could match. Cause whenever you go into medical school, you're kind of just like, am I going to match? Cause they're talking about match on the first day of school.
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure. I mean, for all you guys don't know that match is kind of what happens at the end in March and the end of your 4th year. That chooses whether or not you get to do the specialty that you would like. Just for kind of some background, uh, the specialties in medicine, there's a ton of them, right? You When you start your first day of medical school, all doors are open is kind of how I used to say it, right? Every specialty is open, right? And as you progress through medical school, which is a little bit stressful, of course, but as you progress through medical school, if you start not doing well in your classes, or you don't have research, or you don't do volunteering, or your step 1 and step 2 scores are not good, right, then doors actually start closing, right? And so that's going to be kind of how the more competitive specialties, obviously you need everything, right? You need the volunteering, you need the leadership, you need research, right, good scores, everything, because they're so competitive, so that you have to be able to compete, you have to have everything. So for sure, I
you
mean
have to
that.
be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to me. When they talk about match from the first day of school, what are you thinking? Are what's kind of turning in your head when the very first day you step into medical school, they're already talking about match.
Uh, I was like, I need to find research right now.
Yeah,
I feel like it's such a big deal. And then that's like a whole other thing in the medical community where it's like these medical students are contributing to papers, but it's not really, it's kind of just like random papers about whatever patients they saw, which is, it's not to say like, oh, your contributions are stupid or tiny, but
sure.
we don't want to oversaturate journals with a bunch of random articles that medical students wrote
Yeah,
because they were trying to get more and more publications
one
to
hundred
be
percent.
competitive for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. Kind of what you're saying. I mean, controversial thing that most people don't know, right? What Megan's saying is, obviously you learned this since you started medical school, but a lot of things that you publish, right, like case reports, these retrospective chart reviews and things like that, they're not huge contributions to our medicine, right? It's not
yeah,
groundbreaking. It's not changing management. It's not doing any of that. Majority. I'm not saying all, right? But the reason
yeah,
why we try so hard to push out these papers, even though it's not, I would say, quote unquote, significant, is because, it
mm,
is kind of what we need to do to be able to do kind of the specialties that are competitive. And so that's kind of one of the quote unquote dirty secrets of medicine, right? When you're dealing with these journals that are published, right? Yeah, they sound really smart, right? Because we have to write it in a certain way, but does it actually
yeah,
contribute to anything in medicine? Not really, right? Um,
yeah.
but talking about kind of some controversial things or things about medicine, starting since you started, what do you wish they warned you about medical school that coming in that you didn't know? Like one of these things that we talked about is this research, right, where you're trying to produce things, but it doesn't per se is significant on a clinical setting. What else do you feel as though like you should have been warned before you went to medical school?
I feel like, okay, ironically, it's not necessarily an academic thing, but I think um, I was expecting the social environment to be a lot different. So earlier I mentioned I just graduated. I'm like fresh out of college, basically. I haven't even left college in like it hasn't even been a year since I left college, basically.
Sure.
So I was
Yeah.
very used to the hustle and bustle of the city. There's always something going on every weekend, and I really liked it like that. And then in medical school, it's definitely not as social of an environment. I think some medical schools are more social, but Texas Tech specifically isn't as social as I'm used to, and so. Being in an environment that isn't as social, and then we're all taking the same classes, and everyone's always busy all the time, and everyone's at high stress all the time.
Sure.
I found it really, really difficult to make friends, and people kind of divided into their groups really quickly, which is crazy to me because I was like, how are y'all like getting into these groups so quickly?
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
And so that was a little bit of a struggle that I had at first whenever I started medical school. Just kind of finding where I fit in with this new group of people. And I came from a pretty large high school too. And so when you squeeze my perception of a class size into like 180, it was weird because it's like, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
everybody in my class, but then it's kind of like high school again.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. For sure.
I don't really know how to like explain it, but it just feels like a little bit like high school. And then a lot of my other friends in medical school have said so as well.
Yeah. I mean, I had a very similar feeling kind of when I went into medical school, right? I came from a very big high school. I was also from Houston. There's about 800 people in my high school class. Of course, I went to Texas Tech Medical School, and we also had about 180 in our class size. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting of a setup if you think about it, right? So you take kind of, the top 1% of students from college, right, that are type A personality, work super hard, did well in their MCAT, did
Yeah.
all this stuff, right? And then you funnel those people into a medical school class, right? So, you're going to have very interesting type A personalities in a small group environment, right? So yeah, in a sense, it does feel like a little bit of like high school. And of course, you have everyone is weird in their own way, right? But just imagine, you have a bunch of type A personalities where even if you're weird, you're very confidently weird, right? So it's kind of dealing with a lot of different personalities that are kind of in your face, right? And of course, you're not going to mesh with everyone. And um, I do think that one of the things is that when you start medical school, you're kind of feeling out, what group is it kind of that you fit in mostly, because everyone is so different in their own way, but everyone's so confident in who they are. And so sometimes, yeah, when you're trying to feel out these kind of situations, you might not fit into one, and you'll know pretty fast that you do or do not, because everyone's just so, everyone is themselves, right? And I think that in itself is a weird feeling, I would say. Yeah, so yeah, definitely for sure. I don't think that you have a unique kind of perspective on when you start medical school. It's just such a different vibe, I would say, from college for sure. Where college, I feel as though you meet so many different people, but I feel as though in college you might be a little bit more social. You see a lot more extroverts. You might get a little bit more introverts in medical school that kind of stay to themselves and whatnot. But yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, talk to me about kind of how do you balance, your career and kind of the things that you like to do outside. You mentioned so many hobbies that, from the beginning when you introduced yourself. So, how many hours are you studying, right? Let's say, like I said, going back, let's say it's a Monday before your test. How many hours are you studying for that test, right? And kind of tell me kind of the distribution of hours of what you're doing with that day. It's a Monday, a couple days before your test.
Okay, so I think I'm a little more of the chill medical student, like a chill neurotic medical student, since we're all a little neurotic.
For
But
sure.
so yeah, I take my practice exam on the weekend, and I try to do it as early as possible, and that's after like very non-specific studying. And so my study process is I just use third-party resources and I get all the material in, and that's just my focus on getting it in and having the names of whatever disease is in my brain.
Sure.
And after I take the practice exam, that's whenever I kind of switch over to targeted studying, and I'm like, okay, let's learn all these actual diseases and what specifically goes with them. So I spend the week leading up to the exam doing that. And since I do a lot of non-specific studying
Sure.
leading up to the practice exam, I don't usually pass them. I think the worst that I've done on them so far is like a 58 or
Yeah.
something. But I know people in my class who take it like the day before too because they like to have a little bit more of an accurate
Sure.
percentage.
Sure.
But for me, the number doesn't bother me. It kind of forces me to get it together before the actual exam. And
Sure.
so
So let me kind of chime in a
Monday
little.
before,
Let me chime in a little bit
yeah.
here. Yeah, and sorry to cut you off, but you say you get like a 58 on a 58% on a practice test. I just kind of want to say that
Mhm.
you know many medical students get everyone thinks that when you go to medical school, all students that are in medicine, you're getting 80s 90s, right? But no, the scale is very different in medical school, right? Usually kind of if you're talking about practice test, you're talking about randomized question blocks, things like that. The average is, depending on what question set you're doing, is around 50 to 60%. So meaning, with all the studying that we're doing, right? All the studying that we're doing, we still have so much more to learn, right? And so I just want
Yeah.
people to know that that is kind of standard in the medical field, right? So when you're learning and doing practice tests, you're not talking 80s, 90%, right? If you get an 80 or 90%, you are killing it, right? But most
Yeah.
of us, right? Most of us peasants are getting 50s and 60s all the time, right? I was the same exact way, right? But the key is, learning, right? Like I said. But yeah, I just wanted to, clarify, because yeah,
Yeah.
a ton
No,
of
like the 58, it's like failing, but like I'll get it up. I'm not gonna kill a patient or something
sure,
in the future.
sure,
But yeah, um so with working at like all of my hobbies, I think like especially the ones that I listed, I just listed like three. So working out, photography, and singing or like anything musical. I think the one that I engage in the most is working out. And so what I usually like to do, I mean, and this works for me because I enjoy waking up early in the morning, but I know other people
sure,
don't. But so I just work out as normal at like 7 a.m. in the morning
sure.
and or 7 a.m. And after that, I mean, I take about an hour and a half to finish up at the gym. And then after that, I just go straight to campus and I study there. Um, it usually takes me about till lunchtime to finish all my reviews or a little before lunchtime. And by reviews, I mean Anki reviews, and that's just the flashcard app that
Sure.
freaking every medical student uses.
Yeah,
So
for
it
sure.
takes me a little bit to get through the reviews depending on the day, but I usually spend my morning doing that. And then I'll just go over to the list that I make of the concepts that I need to review, and then I just go straight through. And so, um, sometimes I bring my lunch and then I'll eat at school and then stay at school or like go off campus, or I'll just go home and eat here and then stay here and study or like go to a nearby coffee shop or something. I don't like the back and forth, and so once I'm at school, I stay at school, or like if I'm out of the house, I stay out of the house. But I hate driving back because again, I don't even live in Lubbock, so it's
Sure.
like a
Yeah.
little zigzag whenever I go back. So I usually do that until like 5,
Okay.
if it's a pretty intense day. But I usually try to keep my studying like school stuff like a 9 to 5, and then the rest of the day is just I do whatever. And I think a lot like a misconception of medical students is like we study all day, and I think some people do. I'm sure there are people out there doing 12-hour days, and if that works for them, that's totally fine too. But personally, I just don't like to do that.
Sure.
I'm not a fan of sitting all day, especially like I'm a very active person and I just don't like that. And so, yeah, I think exam week is the busiest week, but I think it's definitely doable. Some of my classmates know that I trained for a marathon during medical school so far. So, like, I feel like for me, if someone can do first year of medical school or at least first semester or like anatomy while training for a really intensive race, and I have classmates who've done really cool races too. Like I know someone did like an Ironman. Okay, so it's like very intense, and we're on. I don't know. It just works out, and it's possible to do your hobbies and stay healthy while also doing well in school.
For sure, for sure. And it seems like, I would say that, from kind of my experience of, my medical school class and kind of the students that I've tutored in the past is that, I would say the
Mhm.
typical range of people studying is probably 8 to 10 hours a day. I would say, would you agree that
Mhm.
that's pretty average?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, like, how many hours did like, I think at most I maybe hit like 6 or 7 hours, but then I've seen classmates like who stay at school later than I do. So it's like I think some people hit more hours of studying than I do. So yeah, I think 8 to 10 is a pretty accurate number.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, this depends on, whether how hard did you procrastinate, right? That's going to be a huge
Yeah.
thing too. And, for those that think that we don't procrastinate, yeah, dude, there's just a different level of procrastination when it comes to medical school, right?
No, this one guy in my class like went fishing in New Mexico like 2 days before our exam. Like he skipped our practice practical, and he was just posting some fish he caught on his story.
Hey,
So yeah, and I mean I wouldn't do that, but I was calling myself chill earlier. So there's a wide range of people
yeah,
here.
for sure, and it just this is what the podcast is all about, right? Is the fact that we are all very human as anyone else, right? And so the same problems that everyone else has is just kind of in a sense magnified in medical school, right? Our procrastination might be if you didn't study a week before, right? Because we have so much information, right? So our procrastination is like, oh, I didn't study until the week of the exam, meaning that you're probably pulling 10 to 12 hours a day just to catch up, right? And so,
Oh,
yeah, it's
yeah.
just different, right? And so, yeah, that my I have very similar stories of my classmates doing kind of weird stuff the day before their exam, right? Going out
Yeah.
before the day exam, right? And then showing
Yeah.
up like barely on time for the test, right? Yeah, that stuff still happens in medical school. So we are no special than other people that are outside of medicine for sure. So talk to me now, kind of about stress, right? Like what do you feel as though is the most stressful part of medical school?
I think the most stressful part is probably, I think a lot of my stress kind of comes down to like the future and
Sure.
whether what I'm doing now is helping me in the long run. So I'm not a very stress prone person. I think I kind of just I just dissociate a lot, so I don't really like think too much into things. And so whenever I do get stressed, it's usually something that's not right here, right now. It's usually, am I gonna get a job after medical
Sure.
school?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what you mentioned is very apparent in most medical students is that, you don't only have the stressors of studying for a test that's, coming up, right? Or, constantly thinking like, oh, when am I going to have time to work out? Or when am I going to have time to do my hobbies, right? Of course, those are your just day to day stressors. But one of the things that people
Mhm.
really don't understand or get a viewpoint in is that, you have this 4 year tract, right, for you to go through school. But depending on what specialty you want to do, right, if it's competitive, right, you're thinking,
Mhm.
when do I have time for research, when do I have time to volunteer,
Mhm.
right, when do I have time to
Yeah.
shadow, right, all these things you have to manage all the time. And kind of the one of the worst things about medical school and stress is that doing all these things, and let's say you do it right, there's still a chance that you don't get a job, like you said, right? And so
Yeah.
definitely for sure that's super stressful. And people don't understand that that's if we're not stressed currently, right, it's in the back of our minds all the time. And
Yeah.
I would say that stress is a little bit difficult to handle when you first start medical school.
Mhm.
Because especially when you just start, you kind of are like, man, like you're always feeling like, am I doing enough, right? And I'm not sure if you have this issue, but when I was in medical school, it's like this constant like, you know because I wanted to do ENT, which is a very competitive field. I always was like, am I doing enough? I'm seeing XYZ, my classmates doing so much
Yeah.
more. So
Uh-huh. A lot of like I mean, and social media is like perfectly normal, but some when you see classmates posting about I don't know, submitting an abstract or something. I don't even know how that works. But
Yeah.
when you see that happening, it's not even that I'm like jealous or something. It's just like, okay, I need to like get on that. I need to
Yeah.
figure out how to do that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's kind of, regardless of, if they're your friends or your acquaintance, right? But, you start to realize in medical school that there's always going to be somebody doing something more than you, right? And I think that that's one of the things, like you said, it's not a jealousy thing or anything like that, right? It's the fact that this, especially when you're driven, everyone's driven in medical school, right? And so everyone's always thinking in the back of the mind, like, oh my gosh, like I'm behind, right? Because, everyone has come from, doing super well in, elementary, middle school, high school, college, right? Everyone's used to being kind of the person that's a go-getter, right? And so I think what
Yeah.
ends up happening in medical school is that you have the go-getters of the go-getters, right? And so then it's always a constant
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, am I doing enough research? Am I shadowing enough?
Yeah.
Am I doing well enough in my classes, right? Is my step score going to
Mhm.
be good enough? All these things kind of always keep swirling around your head. So for sure, for sure. Um, talking about kind of going back here, do you feel like you've missed out on anything in life since you started medical school?
So far, no, but I know that it's definitely gonna happen. I have like a lot, many more years left. But like I said earlier, I kind of have that mentality of always trying to make time for things unless I absolutely can't make it. I know like as I get older, people start to get married, and
Yeah,
I mean, and like right now, like no one's really getting married. Like I said, they're
sure.
all pre-med trying to get into medical school right now. There a lot of my friends are single. Um, and so no, I don't think anybody's getting married anytime soon, but I do have a friend from high school who recently got married in August, and it was like the worst time ever because it was during anatomy, and it's like one of those friends where you're like, okay, we're gonna be at each other's weddings.
Yeah, for sure, for
And
sure.
it was expensive too. It was in Idaho, like a random random state. And so but I made it out there after an anatomy exam, and it was such a quick trip, and I was so sleep deprived. But you know, for now, that's what I can get, and I don't want to miss out on anything unless I absolutely have to.
Yeah.
And I mean, 6 months later, I'm glad I went, but I know that there are going to be things in the future that I just like definitely can't make it to.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, I think I have a very similar perspective is that, you actually have to be very conscious with your time when you're going on the medical career path is because you're going to be studying a lot. You're going to have a lot of tests. You're going to have a lot of responsibilities to do things, research, all this stuff that we talked about in the past. And you try your best to make it to these life events. Weddings that you can, right? Visiting family, visiting, if you have a long distance boyfriend like you, right? Making time to do that. But definitely for sure, there's countless weddings that I have had to miss, right? Countless trips that I've had to miss, right? And, of course, even me visiting family is something that I love doing, but it gets very, very busy at times. And I think that in our field, we don't talk about, enough about the sacrifices that we have to do during this
Yeah.
career, right? To be able to come out and see, we always say the light of the tunnel, right? It's a long freaking route, right? Depending on kind
Yeah.
of what specialty you want, right? So you have 4 years of medical school, you have 3 to 5 or 3 to 7 years of residency, just depending on what specialty you do. And so that's a long time to be, staring at screens, right? Reading lots of textbooks, right? All this
Yeah.
stuff. And so, yeah, definitely for sure.
Yeah, I think also like um I think the definition of sacrifice is different for everybody. So like for me, I feel like I haven't really sacrificed anything, but then because I haven't had like a big event that I actually had to miss yet.
Sure.
But time is also something that you can sacrifice,
Yeah.
and literally just being in a different city is time that's sacrificed from my family. And I have a lot of siblings, a lot of younger siblings, and I don't get to see them. And then if you have a lot of siblings and everybody starts to grow older, there's someone at college, there's someone at another medical school,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
you're all just going to be dispersed all over the place. And so if if I had to think about sacrifice like that, I'd say like, I'm just not at home because I I don't go to school there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's super important to mention. I mean, yeah, I mean, family is super important, right? And of course, us spending, like you said, time out here for our career, right? You're pretty, in a sense, right, isolated from the rest of the world when you're kind of doing medical school
Yeah.
in West Texas, right? So yeah, there are definitely sacrifices that come with it. Do you feel as though, like I said, you just started, right, talking about the time standpoint and sacrifice? Do you feel as though so far, spending time in Lubbock and studying all this time and working hard, kind of like I said, taking tests, learning medicine, things like that, do you feel as though it has been worth it so far for you?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think like, at the end of the day, or you can get very picky about where you go to medical school, right? Everybody wants to stay close to their family. Everybody wants to stay close to their significant other. But with the nature of this field, that's just not what you get. And even whenever you apply to residency and you match, like that's not really, you are probably there's like a very low chance that you would match back home if that's what you want to do. And so but at the end of the day, it's like obviously very worth it. Like I want to do medicine and I'm going to be able to do it no matter what medical school I go to. And I think also whenever you go into a field like this where you're isolated and you don't get to see your loved ones a lot, it makes you really appreciate the time with them whenever you do get to see them. And so I've always been really big on the concept of intentionality, or like I got really big in it like my junior year of college. But it kind of it kind of comes in here where you can't just like blindly spend your time on your phone or whatever, or
Yeah,
just like spending your weekends doing whatever and just messing around. It kind of forces you to be intentional with your time. So
yeah,
you pick your friends a little more closely. You pick the people that you keep in your circle a little more closely. I'm not just gonna go out and spend my money on and do whatever. Like it's just
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and
for
I
sure.
was never really reckless anyway. But it kind of forces you to see why you're doing all of this and what is the meaning of all this. Where do you fit in with medicine?
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree with you. I'm a big proponent of being intentional with your time. I tell, my friends that are in medicine the same thing of, those that are struggling with, managing, whether it's studying or residency or, trying to figure out when to have time for friends, when to have time for, other hobbies or things like that, or even just the daily routine of being healthy, working out, eating correctly, right? I think all comes down to being intentional with your time. And I think that also being intentional with your time isn't kind of a given, right? It's something you have to work at, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
especially like you mentioned diet, and I totally forgot. I never even talked about diet, but like some people like don't eat breakfast or they don't eat all their meals, whereas for me, like I always try to get all my meals too because it's really big on your performance in medical school and how good you feel. And I try to refrain from just automatically going to pick something up on the way home, even though
sure,
it's
sure,
very convenient. Luckily there's nothing really in Wolford, so whatever.
yeah.
I'm not really doing that much, but yeah, that's just another thing that feeds into intentionality, and like taking care of yourself in medicine.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And talking about kind of picking things up from the way home, right? I mean, when I was a first year medical student, I mean, I started so far behind the eight ball because I didn't study very well in college, and so I had to kind of come up
Mhm.
with ways to study in medicine or medical school when I
Mhm.
started. And so I remember anatomy, and anatomy was one of the worst times of my life because I mean, I
Yeah,
loved it, right? But I was so far
yeah.
behind that like I'm not even
Mhm.
exaggerating. I was studying like about 14 hours a day just to stay ahead
Oh
because
my
I
god.
just had such a bad study habit right
And
from undergrad.
it's already so much too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I remember that this sounds so nasty, but I remember that during the anatomy block, which is about like 2 months, I would eat Sonic, which is right across our medical school, like every day, twice a day. And I remember like I was
Yeah,
like so
twice a
unhealthy.
day.
Yeah, it was so bad. It was just so close, and I was like, I just need to eat something fast and study, right? And I always say that, tell that story because it's just in a sense, right? When you start medical school and you're trying to figure out like what the hell is going on, right? I had no idea like how to study, what to study, right? And it's just all this information. And you're just like barely staying above water. At least how I felt. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you had that same experience, but I was just so like I was so behind because my study and work ethic from college was not great. So,
Mhm.
if you don't have that system already, you have to make it up somehow. And that's just time at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to adjust at first, especially like moving so far away and then things are so different in college. I don't know if you did a gap year or if you just went straight into medical school.
Yeah, I went straight through. I didn't do a gap year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
like I feel like it's harder on you if you don't do a gap year. I like at the beginning of the fall semester, I was like it was on like the really bad days when I was just like, I should have done a gap year.
yeah,
Like any bad thing happens, and I would just be like, I should have just done a gap year. Like I'm just not vibing with these people.
yeah,
I like there's just so much school. Like I should have done a master's or something and just
yeah.
like gotten a different degree.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we don't, in medicine, we don't talk about it enough of like how many times, like throughout, I mean, you just started, but throughout my career, right? From medical school to residency, you kind of wake up some days and you're like, what the hell did I do, right? I should have done something else, right?
I
Um,
just
but
finished
yeah,
this.
I mean, it's a lot of time that you're committing, but of course, I think it's very normal to think like that, right? Just random days where it's rough and you're like, dang, right? But I think one of the key things is, everyone gets stressed, right? Everyone has those kind of moments where it's like, man, this was super, super rough. Maybe I should have done something else. But the key thing is, the perseverance, and I think that's what medical school like treats you. One of the main lessons that it treats you is that regardless of kind of the things you have to overcome, it definitely is worth it. At the end.
Mhm.
Yeah. So a couple last questions here. I guess, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
5 years. Okay. What is that? What year is it? Okay, 2029. Um, I honestly, so, I right now for specialties, because that's like the first thing that I kind of think of whenever I hear 5 years. Very open to other specialties, but I don't really know what specialty I'm going to end up in. So in 5 years, I graduate in 2027. So in 5 years, I'll be 2 years into residency. And honestly, I don't really have a very clear image of where I see myself. 2029, what is that? Like, I'll be in my late 20s by then. So I think hopefully I will be in a residency program that I am happy with. One that I like intentionally picked for very specific reasons, and one that I had my pick at. So something that I wanted, and I handpick it myself. And I think I want to be like I would like to go back to Houston for my family.
Yeah.
But then it also depends on like where my boyfriend is too. That's the thing with the relationships in medicine. It's freaking hard to plan because he's gonna do residency match too. So we'll like I have to wait and see how that goes for him because
Yeah.
he's a year above me. But hopefully close to my family in Houston or my boyfriend or both if they're both in Houston. And I'm hoping that I um, will be able to see patients and view them holistically and being that person for them. I also studied nutrition in college. I did a bio and nutrition degree, and so I want to hopefully be able to implement that into my practice somehow um, to help patients get the care that they need by referring them to like dietitians or
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
nutritionists. I want to like make sure that I have a good knowledge of the rest of the healthcare team so that if I can't help a patient in one way, then someone else can. So I just hope I'm like a well-rounded physician.
Yeah, for
I hope
sure.
I'm good at what I do and that I'm close to the people that I love.
Yeah. So, seems like kind of your 5 year projection, right? Is
Mhm.
that's a good one, saying that you want to be a holistic physician, right? A good physician, of course, right? One of the bad things about medicine is like location, where, right? Even
Yeah,
specialty
it's
when it's
very
so,
up in the air.
yeah. I mean, that stuff in medicine, is so up in the air, especially as a first year, right? And we've all been there, right? It's like, well, like, where are you going to be in 5 years? It's like, well, I would love to be here, and then people always ask, like,
I wish I could tell you.
yeah, it's like I wish I could tell you, right? Like, that's just kind of how match works. I mean, you match somewhere, and it's pretty much a legal binding contract, and you stay in
Yeah,
residency
you
for a
just
while.
have to go.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So for sure, that's one of the kind of not so great things about medicine, where that's up in there. But yeah, for sure, I think the sentiment of being a great physician, and hopefully being able to do or practice medicine in a field that you would like, is kind of very similar thought process with medical students, for sure. uh, so I guess my last question for you, okay, one to sign off on, is that if you were to give advice to pre-med students, since you're a first year, what advice would you want to give them?
I would say to um like how do I phrase this? Um I think like so something that whenever I have a lot of free time and I start thinking about it a lot is whenever I first started college, my older sister was a junior in college and she was about to take her MCAT. And so MCAT was always kind of on the horizon for me as a
Sure.
college kid. And I would always just think to myself, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's taking her MCAT. Like, I can't believe that's going to be me in just 2 short years. And then, whenever I was about to take OChem, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm about to take OChem. This is like what all the pre-med, like all the smart pre-meds who are like in medical school, like y'all all did this. And I just hear the worst things about it. And then, like before I started medical school, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be taking med school exams in a few weeks. So, there's always going to be a challenge that comes up, especially in a career like medicine. It's so long and there's so many obstacles that you have to overcome to eventually get to the finish point of, the end of your residency. And I think whenever you're starting out or before you get to the end stage of it, it always intimidates you and you're like, I can't believe that's going to be me. Even with the second years right now, I'm like, I can't believe that's going to be me in a year studying for step
Sure.
one. But when the time actually comes for you to do it, like when the time came for me to take OChem, my MCAT, and then apply to medical school, I kind of just like did it. Like I just went through with it. And now I'm in medical school. And so I guess like the overarching thing is just like you'll always be able to rise to the challenge. It always feels like a lot, especially as a freshman in college. You're like, I have 3 more years of college plus 4 years of medical school plus it's so many years. I don't even know how many total it is. And I don't want to do the math because I'm
Yeah.
tired,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's so daunting at the very beginning that you can't wrap your mind around whether you'll even be able to do it, like if it's even possible. And it just seems like a superhero feat, all the people who do it, like
Yeah.
whenever we were talking earlier about that starstruck feeling, it's like, holy crap, you're at the end of your residency and I'm over here starting medical school, it always feels like that at the beginning. And it always feels like that as you're about to go through another big milestone in your journey. But you always make it through. You always rise to the challenge. And I think that's also a good, like, it's a good trait to have whenever you're pursuing medicine because there's going to be like a bunch of stuff. And then even after residency, when you're in attending or you're practicing
Yeah.
independently, there's always going to be something because medicine's always changing. There's always controversies in medicine. And it's like it's a changing field. And so if you have that mindset of, I'll rise to the challenge when the time comes, and then focus on what you're doing right now in the present, then that'll get you very far.
Yeah. I
So,
think I think that's great
and then
advice.
just have fun with it.
Yeah.
Don't take everything so seriously.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great advice. I think that, like you said, it's a long, long journey, right? most of us think about medicine super early on, right? In college, some even think a little bit
Mhm.
later. But even if you figure out that you want to do medicine your junior year of college, let's say, right, it's still a long journey. And
Mhm.
um, like you said, even till this day, I'm almost done with residency, but I'm learning new things, right? And there's always new struggles, right? But being
And
able
there's
to
like
rise to the occasion. Say it again.
you meet I was going to say, like, you meet so many people even at the end of your training, and you learn so much from everybody. Like I had a lot of mentees whenever I was in my latter years of college. And yeah, they're younger than me, but I learned so much from them. And that's something that just happens with the field. Like, it's fun. You learn a lot from people who are older and younger than you.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, it's always changing. There's always something to learn. And what I've learned throughout kind of my medical career, right? And to be honest, there's still so much of my medical career that I need to go through and still learn, right? But the more that you learn, I always say that the more that you figure out that you have way more to learn, right? So it's just this ever
Yeah.
revolving thing of like, you learn something and you're like, oh crap, I don't know three other things from the thing that I just learned. So
Yeah.
it's a vast amount of knowledge. And I think that, like you said, focusing on one thing at a time, and then when these big milestones come, it's just tackling one thing at a time. And if you put everything together and think of everything at once, it becomes very daunting, and it might even be discouraging at some times, right? But
Yeah.
just taking things one thing at a time, and really rising to the occasion for each one of those milestones, and just pushing through. No, everyone thinks that it's an easy journey, right? Because you only see kind of the beginning and the end, right? But the journey is
Yeah.
difficult, and I think it's difficult for everyone. To be honest with you, it's
Mhm.
difficult for a lot of my friends. It's difficult for me, but I think we all came out, as good physicians and things like that. And so, yeah, I think that's great advice for sure.
Do you have any advice
Yeah, my
for
advice.
myself as a
Yeah.
or just
So
pre-med?
for medical students that are starting just like yourself, right? Very similar, right? Be intentional with your time, right? The better efficiency with how you spend your time is going to yield greater results in the future. So today you might, let's say, take 2 hours to study, but if you slowly figure out how you can make that into an hour 45 minutes or an hour for a topic or whatever it is, the more efficient you can be with your time. It just allows you to do more with your day, right? Everyone only has 24 hours in the day, but how you spend it and be intentional with your time allows you to do the hobbies, allow you to do the research, allow you to experience, shadowing in the OR, earlier than your classmates or whatever it is. But I'm a huge proponent of being intentional with your time, and this is a trait that's learned over. It's not over a couple months, or I mean, you can always get better with your time, and that takes years. And even as residents, right? When I started a residency, I thought I was good with my time, but then when I started residency, I figured out that there's way more to improve on to even be better with your time, right? And that deals in so much in medicine of how to manage, you're seeing a ton of patients in the hospital or a ton of clinic patients while you have to write notes and prepare for the OR and study for your insert. So it's always a juggling act. And that's just the medicine, right? And that's not even talking about, oh, how do I keep in touch with my high school friends? How do I see my family? How
Yeah.
do I spend time with my fiance? All this stuff, right? And it all comes down to being deliberate with your time, intentional with your time. And so that would be kind of my big advice. Of course, all the study hard and have time to take care of yourself, all the generic stuff, for sure, that for sure is important. But like I said, if you can be intentional with your time, it allows you to do those things like take care of yourself, right? Study more, right? Travel more, spend time with your family more. All that stuff just comes down to how you use your time.
Good advice.
Yeah. Well, it's nice, nice having this podcast with you, Megan. I'm sure that we'll be having more podcasts together in the future. But this was great. Do you have any last remarks before we sign off?
Not any at the top of my head. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, for sure. It was my pleasure. All right. I'll talk to you later then.
Bye.
Bye.